Okay, we'll get started then. Our main topic today is going to be past technology, and we've got a bunch of examples up here that people can come up after I do some quick stuff here and a little bit of background. So, let's see. But first we'll do a little club agenda. The next MACSIG meeting is November 16th. And again, if you do have an Apple or an iPhone or a tablet, an Apple tablet, it's well worth it there. Our next general meeting is going to be November 28th, which is after Thanksgiving and after Black Friday. And that'll be holiday gift ideas. We'll have our traditional pizza lunch with Pop. If you want to help, I think we're still looking for somebody for the Pop and water and ice. And you can either talk to myself or Jim there or one of us if you want to pick up Pop, water, and ice. And the club will reimburse you, so it's not out of pocket, but just a little help Stan out there. The other help I'm asking for, if you do have any ideas for holiday gift ideas, things that you've seen that look interesting, send them to myself and I'll make sure and include it and talk about it next month then. Officers, Jim Holman is our president there. Linda Brown, I don't see Linda. Paul Ebert is our membership secretary. I think he had to do something with his grandchild there. Mike Griffin is our treasurer in MACSIG. Mike just came in there with his Mac there. Stan Miller is our secretary. Andrew Pertusi is our communication coordinator. And my name is Tom Kreitzer. I'm a director at large. Members old and new, you can pay your dues to Paul. Since Paul isn't here, you can give them to myself and I'll get them to Paul. And a reminder, if you're changing your email, make sure and notify us because that's how we send out the notices and renewals and everything there. If you do have suggestions for topics, email them to any member of the board. We're always looking for people to volunteer to present on any hardware and software that you might be using or to write an article. We have our monthly eBytes newsletter, and whether it's a sentence or multiple pages, we'll put it in the newsletter there. Website, we do publish meeting slides and handouts. There's no handout today, but the slides, I'll put those out there, and that'll have a few links there and that. We also do put our past meeting recordings, the audio and the slides. And we have our deal section, our eBytes newsletters out there. And that's where it's located. Any club questions? Okay. Okay, our main topic is past technology. And I asked people to bring in stuff. And thank you to the people that did bring in a few things. I brought in a few things. And so we can talk about that. First, we'll do kind of a quick history of the PC Club in general. And then I'll give a little history of my background. And then we can kind of mill around and look at some of the machines and talk stories if people want there. Excuse me. I added a new page out on the website. It's under the About Us on the Personal Computer Club website. And within there, I added some of the history, some old scans of eBytes. So the eBytes, for those that haven't been around a while, at one time we had, this is glossy paper, 28 pages. This is what the eBytes was, monthly newsletter there for the club. And I put some of those, I was cleaning out my attic and found a bunch of them and put some out there. I don't have all of them, but I put a few of them from different years and some different interesting ones there. I also put some links out there to some sites that have some information on history, and I put a list of the timeline for the IBM Microsoft operating systems. So if we take a quick look there. So if you go out to the About Us, we have our pictures with the officers there. But then down here, PCC and PC history. So if you click on that, here's some fun facts and history. Club was started in 1981, February of 1981, with 35 members, and the president was Ivan Peterson. Just to give you a little background, these are some of the dates when when these first models came out. So the Apple II came out in June of '77. There actually was an Apple I. It was just a circuit board, didn't have a case or a keyboard. That was introduced in July of '76. Commodore PEP, June of '77. Radio Shack, August of '77. TI, the TI-99 there. Osborne 1 in '81. The IBM wasn't introduced until September of 1981. So it wasn't available until after the club had started there. The club grew pretty fast. By December of '82, it had 200 members. And then this I had gotten from the e-bytes. Like I said, I had a whole stack of e-bytes that I went through and took out some of the information, scanned some of the copies, and put it out here. So if you're interested in who the officers were, and then we had committee directors and SIGs, and we had Disc of the Month. We were selling discs with games and different utilities on there. We taught classes, instructor-led basic and intermediate programming classes, 5 1/4 inch disc testing program. How many people were in the 5 1/4 inch disc testing program? Oh, I'm the only one? Boy. That was a real boon at that time, because obviously 3M made the 5 1/4 inch disc. One of the members knew the division that was producing the discs and got them to essentially give us free discs, a box of discs. And our duty was to take the disc, format it, and report any errors. We had to fill out a one-page report of, did they format on the first try? Did we run into any errors? Things like that with that. But at that time, a box of 10 diskettes sold for about $30, and the cheapest that you could get it is maybe $20, and we were getting like 4 of these boxes a year, so about $80 in free stuff just for testing out the discs there. We had the Databytes, was called Databytes when it first came out, and this is what it looked like here. It glossy cover, printed off-site, wasn't done, wasn't mimeographed or anything at 3M. Ads in here. The early days of the PC Club, this was actually a moneymaker, because we'd sell ads, and the ads brought in maybe after publishing, after paying for printing this and mailing it out and stuff like that, the club was making $250 a month by doing this, because the vendors, you know, with these ads and stuff like that, were so desperate to connect with computer users. So there was such a market for it. So half of this e-bytes is ads that the club has in there. So they're kind of interesting to look at the ads and stuff like that. And I've got a bunch of them up here you can take a look at. In 1983, it became the largest club at 3M and continued to grow. I think at the peak, about 85, there was 1,200 members. So quite a large number of people in a wide variety of machines. We had Commodores and Radio Shacks and Osbornes and TIs and Apple, and then when the Mac came along, the Mac, and those are separate SIGs at one time, and so there was all this variety of SIGs and everything out there. And for the longest period there, the Apple was the largest group. The IBM was not the largest group until, I don't know, 85 or 86. then it surpassed the Apple group there. During the early days in '85 and stuff like that, you didn't have an internet. So the way the club kind of shared stuff and things like that is we had a bulletin board, a dial-up bulletin board. You dial a specific number, you could connect, you could leave mail there, you could put public domain software out there, download it. But at that time, you were dealing with, some of the modems were as slow as 300 baud or 1200 baud. Some of the modems were acoustic. If you remember the acoustic couplers that the phone would go in. So those are the early days of trying to telecommute there. And the bulletin board itself could only support 2 people at a time in the bulletin board. So it wasn't an unlimited number of people coming in and accessing it. It was 2. So sometimes you'd stay up late at night, or if you were downloading a program, downloading that program may take you a half an hour or an hour to download, just because of the slow speeds and things like that. But you can look through this. I tried to list some of the changes in officers in here and what was going on, and some of the counts for what the SIGs had, the number of people, and things like that. Let's see. Yeah, here at March of '85, I just put this in because that was listed in one of the e-bytes. You had the Macintosh 512 sells for $2,795, which adjusted for inflation is $6,680. So you get an idea. Some of these early machines, people go, well, boy, why didn't you buy, an Apple One or all these different models? You couldn't afford to do too much there. It was very, very expensive for things there. Okay, let's see. And over the years, this is kind of interesting. In '85, Bill Gates presented Microsoft Word for DOS. I believe that was a PC Club meeting. I don't think that was an IT one, but I don't recall. But what's that? Yeah. For those that aren't familiar, people kind of assume that Microsoft has always had the software, and no. When it first started out, WordPerfect was the word processing program. DOS or Microsoft Word was kind of bad, and WordPerfect and Word at that time, you were putting all kinds of control characters into documents. You didn't have a WYSIWYG document for stuff wasn't bold. You were putting in control characters.
There was a WordStar before that.
Yeah, WordStar. And if you go back on the spreadsheet side, you had VisiCalc and so Excel wasn't the spreadsheet package. You had all these other packages which had started up and got their niche early on there. But yeah, that was kind of interesting. And the club at that time, you can see here in March of '86, Adam Osborne, who founded the Osborne Corporation, spoke at the February meeting. PC Magazine, Bill McCrone, he spoke at the July '86 meeting. And that was kind of interesting. I recall that because PC Magazine was the Bible if you had an IBM PC. And at the time, the magazine was this thick every month and was the largest monthly publication of any magazine. Then they went to bi-weekly, and it went down a little bit, but kind of similar to the data bytes. Advertisers wanted to get out there and sell to this new market and this new thing. So everybody was buying ads. There was just so much money in the magazine business and stuff like that that it was a wild time. Let's see. Yeah, '87, the membership started dropping. So again, we were kind of at that peak of 1,200 members, and then it started dropping in '87, 900 members, and The SIG started kind of realigning. You had DEC Rainbow SIG, HP SIG, things like that out there. And you had a separate Mac and an Apple because obviously there was, two different machines, two different directions Apple was going with stuff and things like that. Let's see, what are some of the other? But you can take a look through here. You can see I don't have a lot of information in these later years because the eBytes or Databytes wasn't published, I don't believe, and I didn't have any copies, and I didn't have the old board minutes or stuff like that I could dig stuff up from. But the club started waning. Used to be classes on training classes on spreadsheets and DBase. DBase was big. You had a little bit of everything there. Then in '99, membership kind of shot back up to 800 members, and at that time, that's when the internet kind of came about. And 3M had, or the PC Club had an offering for dial-up internet connectivity to an ISP, and it was cheaper than what you could, a normal person could get it, so membership went up at that time there. And also at that time, I note like in 2000, that was the first PC picnic. And at that time, the board had over $15,000 in the treasury. So from selling the disc of the month and the eBytes and different deals, we were getting a small subsidy from 3M Club. We had over $15,000 in the bank. And the president at that time and the people at that time, what they wanted to do is they wanted to disband the club, spend it all down and disband it. So the first picnic and a lot of the picnics after, we've always had door prizes and things like that. Well, we don't take in enough money on the picnic to pay for all the food and the door prizes and everything. So we do draw down on that every year that we have it there. But I happen to get involved again with the club. I've been on and off the board, and I've been membership secretary, past president, vice president, director at large. I've done all kinds of things over the years for the club, but I did not want to see the club go away, so I said there's still, things that the club can do for members and can help out there. We're not going to be as large as we once were, but we can certainly help people out there. Let's see. And these are some of the later ones where Jim and Linda have taken over as president and vice president and kind of swapped places there. And Mike came into the board there. I forgot, do you remember around when you came in, Mike?
My memory gets good.
Okay. Because, yeah, you were first, with the Mac and the eBytes, because I found him listed in there a couple of times.
So, sorry, Tom.
Yeah.
First, well, there was an initial person, but a person who carried the Mac safe for many years was Paul Marshall.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's been lots of people. When my best estimate, I say down here, is over the years, because of the way the membership is done, we assign new membership numbers and to people in that. However, if you've been gone for a year and then come back, you do get a new number. We don't look up your old number or that. But we've had 4,600 people over the years flow through the club there over the years. So a lot of people there. And as I mentioned, about 1,200 was the peak in 1985. This is where I have scanned in some of the old eBytes. So if you're just interested in looking at those, they're in PDF format. You can go through and look at the old eBytes there. thousands of computers are gathering again in Minneapolis. So you used to have, the convention center was just crowded with people and stuff like that, Twin Cities Computer Show. But there's a bunch of stuff there. Then I have some links to PC history, old computers, if you want to look up a little information about it. Yeah, obviously, you can look on Wikipedia. I actually like this site better than Wikipedia. It lists all the different models, or many of the early models there. And then, so if you go to any of them, it has the details, some other links, some interesting things about it, but it's just some real nice, handy information on the different machines there. Timeline of computer history, this is a nice one I found, and PC Magazine did a history a few years ago, and this has kind of the timeline again. This I put in here is the timeline of the Microsoft IBM PC operating systems. So the first one was obviously with the first IBM that came out in 1981, DOS 1.0. And so you had your various versions of DOS. Then you had the Windows starting to come up, and Microsoft wanted to go down the NT route, and NT obviously never caught on that well, and Windows moved ahead, and then these are the various versions of Windows.
When did 3M decide that they were only going to support IBM or PCs as a corporate?
The early days when I first started, you had more Apple in here than you had IBM. And actually, the area that I was in, I worked in IT, and I had my machines my machine at home, and 3M IT was looking to replace the dumb terminals, because we use dumb terminals to connect to our mainframe. And when we connected to our we had silent 700s to or timeshare systems and other things there, but they were dumb terminals. So they wanted to have this new device, new computers that offered, the main feature of the new devices was multiple sessions that you could have, a switch between multiple sessions that you couldn't on the dumb terminals. And we did an evaluation at that time to see what 3M IT should use. And we went out to Cupertino and we met with Apple, we met with Microsoft, we met with HP, we met with everybody to figure out what we should go with. And if the Apple had a decent 3270 emulator, we would have gone more with Apple than the IBM. We went with IBM because there was a better 3270 emulator. At the time, we were first going to put in a token ring network to connect these, not an Ethernet. There's two competing network topologies there. One is Ethernet and the way that it talks and is connected, and another is token ring. And we were going to put in token ring because IBM was saying that's what the future is. And we did a little experimenting with it. We ended up rolling out Ethernet to the people with IBM computers in DOS, and then eventually moved to Windows. We wanted to use NT. NT really didn't pan out. Software wasn't there, things like that, so we ended up down that path. But over the years, 3M has had a large presence of Apple machines, and especially in the club, like I said, when that club first started, it basically was an Apple club. It wasn't an IBM because the IBM wasn't even out.
But at some point, 3M dictated that you could only buy PCs for the office, not Apples.
That probably wasn't, the dictation probably wasn't until the late 90s. So, I mean, those early years, and Mike probably saw it more. I mean, you were in the lab and stuff like that. If a lab device had an interface or graphics, it was always better on an Apple Mac than it was on an IBM. Yeah, Mike.
Just to add to it, it was pretty daunting to get a Mac when that decision was made, but there were 3 criteria that you could use to justify one, and one of them is it comes with the equipment. I'm not going to remember all of these. The second one was there's some software or data on the Mac that does not easily transport to the PC. And the third one is your major customer base, like in the case of we're doing a lot of graphics and graphic films. If your customer base talks to you with the Mac, it makes sense for you to have the Mac. And that aside, we also have had a discount on Mac equipment pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, so Apple has been here. Yes, Stan?
I don't know the time frame, but my recollection is that the labs were typically Apple and the offices were typically IBM. Not the lab offices, but where the clerks and secretaries and division management.
Yeah, because to buy any hardware or software at that time, I mean, you just wrote a purchase request. It wasn't going through a central IT only, because there was no IT support for the personal computers or anything. I mean, when IT put it in for themselves, we had to do all our own installation. We had to do all of our own software and rolling out everything. Yeah.
The manufacturing plants, I think, were also pretty much, or the manufacturing side of each division was pretty much independent of what was going on and would decide what to do at their site. But that tended to dictate that whoever was in manufacturing at corporate headquarters at least had to have some kind of a terminal.
Yeah, that's a good point. HP, you'll see on the SIGs, was rather prominent, and the reason for that is a lot of the manufacturing was done with HP, and so they'd use that equipment and that. But emulators, the early days, you were using emulators to get to the IBM. Then we had the DEC VAX machines. Then we had HP machines. So we had all these different machines, and you'd use different emulators to connect to them. And we had different email systems, and none of these email systems talked to each other. So you couldn't send it from one to another. If you knew somebody in the that was out in manufacturing to do stuff, you had to get on that system and send an email from that system. You couldn't send it from the IBM over. And it was only later that stuff started talking to each other.
Just to further the point, props was big for a while for email, but there was domestic props and international props, and even though we're one company, the two systems didn't really talk to each other.
Right. Okay, so that's the history. Yes, Chuck?
One of the HP, one of the major reasons we bought so much HP is because they were a big customer.
Yeah, HP came back at us and said, we buy a lot of your discs and do stuff. You will buy some of our stuff. Yeah, at that time they were looking at, the bottom line. How much did they sell? What did they buy? I'll just do a quick history of me, and then we can kind of talk about some of this other stuff. My history, in '64 at age 7, I used to keep track of everything with the column pads. If you remember the old column pads, like 6 columns and 5 columns for adding stuff up. I used to keep track of that stuff at age 7. My spending and my savings. I'd also keep track of scores, the Vikings, and things like that. And I know. Well, and I had this formula for predicting scores. Home field was worth so many points, and you'd go through points and things like that. As I got older in the 70s, I got into CB radios. My dad had a store, and we had a large directional antenna on top of that, and sunspots. You had a lot of sunspot activity at that time, and I was able to talk to over 500 people in 40 plus states around the country there. You do the same as the amateur radio. You'd CQDS, and you'd connect, and then you'd send postcards to confirm your talk with them, and you'd try and build the map out of everything there. I built heat kits, heat kit Morse code. I was studying to get my amateur license, and at that time I figured out I don't really need the amateur license. I can do most of this stuff without an amateur license and computers. So I made model rockets, electronic kits. I fixed radios. When I was in high school, I fell in love. They had programmable calculators. So if you remember the old programmable calculators, you could put in simple deals, add A and B, store it in register C, then take this and move it here and do this. And so you were able to program. You had very little space. You had no memory. If power went out, everything was gone. But I was able to compute the stats and some of the stuff that I was doing in the column pads there. Then in '75, Popular Science cover introduced the MITS Altair 800, and I think Ed brought in. So take a look at this. This is one of the first things that kind of caught everybody's attention. This computer kit, and basically all it is lights and switches, but you can program it. And I don't know what it has, 4K or?
That one is it's got 1K of RAM.
1K.
And 256 bytes of raw BIOS.
Yeah. So, and I mean, so you look at this stuff, and that original, the original sold for kit price. So you'd solder the stuff and put it together. It's $439, or if it was soldered, it was $621. That's the equivalent of $2,800 today. Programming was done with the switches. I didn't buy it, but thought it was the future, and I wanted to be part of it. So I wanted in on that. Yep.
I remember seeing, even before that, a computer that actually used punch cards. Little home.
You did have stuff. You did have. I mean, obviously the punch cards in business, but this is home computing. Okay. Okay.
I just remember seeing that when I was a kid. I thought that was.
Yeah. I started at St. John's in '75. At that time, they didn't have a computer science degree. But I was going for a business administration accounting because I knew that would, at least I had talked to other people, and that would get me into the field that I wanted. I took classes, and in the classes we did use punch cards for the classes, but also what we used, if you remember, the old teletype. This is a punch tape, so if you wanted to store something, you stored it on here, and each of these dots, or a line of dots there, represents a character letter. Yes?
Yeah, I worked in the Penny's catalog department when I was in high school, and they transmitted orders by punch.
Yeah. This was done with, if you remember the old teletype, and you'll see it on old movies, the news flash or stuff like that, because it literally was a typewriter that was punching the deals there, and that. So yeah, it was archaic compared to today anyway. My first machine that I bought was in 1978. It was an Exidy Sorcerer. That's what I have up here. At that time, certainly a lot better and cheaper than the Apple II that was available, or the Commodore, or the Radio Shack. It sold for $895, which is equivalent to almost $3,500 today. Has an 8-track tape cartridge this is its basic. The basic is in the 8-track cartridge here. It's not in tape form. It's in a circuit that's inside here, and then this plugs into the side. And this is one of their features there. But bought that. and started doing stuff with that. At that time, I did everything with cassettes. So most of us, if you're early, you weren't using floppies. Floppies were way too expensive, and most of them were 8-inch floppies at that time. They were big ones. They weren't 5 1/4-inch floppies either, and they're single-sided and all kinds of other issues. But you were storing it on a cassette tape. Electrostatic printers, which is silver paper that kind of curled up and went bad over time. Loud, slow, and kind of bad there. When I was at St. John's, I did analysis and design. I designed the St. John's Prep School class registration system, which is kind of nice. I got paid for it and class credits, and knew that that's what I wanted to do. In 1979, we had a system design class. They had a system design class at St. John's. There was 4 people in the system design class, myself and 3 others. Our project, we did the analysis and design for a music catalog system for NPR. NPR used to be headquartered up at St. John's, 1 floor up from the computer room there. So they had all the albums, and they'd keep track on sheets, and then recipe cards of their playlists and when they last played it, and if they wanted to look up a Christmas song, where it was located, because you're talking, thousands and thousands of records and artists and albums and things like that. So we did the analysis to do a computer system for that. April of '79, I started at I started at 3M in IS&DP. At that time, 3M was hiring. You didn't have to have a computer science degree. You didn't have to have anything. You didn't even technically need a degree. We had philosophy majors. We had administrative assistants. We had everything. What 3M would do is they'd hire you, and then they'd send you through a 6-month training to learn COBOL, JCL, and punch cards. So the industry was blossoming that fast. They were just taking anybody there. In '81, when the IBM came out, I mentioned this to some of the people earlier, my brother-in-law was working for IBM, and he got the employee discount, 50% off. I ordered the first one, 64K, which was maxed out, 1 5 1/4-inch single-sided drive, DOS, for the low price of $35.67 after the discount. So, that's a lot of money. You could buy a car for that back then. So it wasn't $100 down or something like that. A little over a year later, I upgraded to 256K color monitor, two sides, double-sided, and that cost me another $1,800 for a total of $5,374, which is over $15,000 in today's dollars. Like I mentioned, I much prefer the prices today than what they were back then. And the CPU was an 8-bit processor, which means the maximum that the processor could address is 64K of memory. But we used to use the memory above 64K for print spooling, RAM drives, and other features. Yeah.
A little trivia, to go beyond 64K, you had to do what's called an intersecond jump, which meant 10 clock cycles to get you there. So it became problematic if you had a big program.
Yeah. So yeah, and going back to Ed's first machine there, 1K, 1,000 bytes, and that was considered a lot then, and they just progressed over time to K, 1,000 bytes, and then to megabytes, and then gigabytes, and now terabytes. So it's come a long way there. That's all I had. People can come up and take a look, and we can kind of talk, unless there's general questions that somebody has, or otherwise, come on up and You can ask some questions. I'm going to stop my recording here.